My name is Anna Vignoles and I'm Director of the Leverhulme Trust. There's a myth that academics sit in their ivory towers and can get on with their research, left alone to pursue great ideas, and at the end of it all they produce a fantastic book or a research article. But of course academia has not been like that for a very long time. Academia has also been a very competitive environment. When I talk to colleagues in the commercial world, they're often surprised about just how brutally competitive academia can be. And then in recent years, the situation has been made more difficult by a looming financial crisis in higher education. For years, higher education globally was expanding, so the sector had relatively benign conditions. Doesn't mean there weren't problems, but by and large they weren't sort of existential economic ones. And at the moment, it feels, certainly in the UK, that higher education funding really is at a potential crisis point. Now, that all adds to the stress that everybody in academia feels. And by everybody, I don't just mean the academics, I mean all the people that make academic projects happen, which include technicians and support staff and people who run universities. And I think that sort of perfect storm of an ultra-competitive environment combined with some contraction in the sector is making people feel very, very challenged and stressed. In terms of what we might do about it, I think one of the things that we really need to do is recognise that research is a collective endeavour. If you think about a project, even writing a book in humanities, which feels like a lone scholar project, right? When you actually think about all the people that contribute to that project, the librarian who manages the archive, the junior researcher who did some research for that project, the other academic that takes the teaching that the researcher is no longer doing, and indeed, as I said, the support staff that keep the whole place running. It's an incredibly collective endeavour, and we just don't recognise that enough in the sector. And I think one way to roll back on some of the stress is to really do things a little bit differently when we think about the sort of collective nature of what it takes to put on a good research programme. One of the ways that we can support research, really high quality research, is funding big projects over long periods of time. And the reason why they're so successful is not because necessarily the project itself is more fantastic than any other project, but it's because the long duration of those grants allow an awful lot of people to be supported through their career. We fund a centre at Sheffield that's looking at technology to remove CO2 from the environment. It was just an idea when it started. We're now at the stage where we have venture capitalists interested in this as an idea. And along the way, that centre has trained a large number of researchers, enabled a large number of PhD students to succeed. It has given support to mid-career researchers who've gone on and started their own labs and doing their own research programmes. And so when you take it in the round, those big long-term grants have really supported a wonderful array of research outcomes, yes, but also hopefully helped an awful lot of people on their way in terms of career. And that model of a centre or a large project grant is very much based on the idea that it's going to take lots of different people from lots of different disciplines, and indeed technicians and support staff and lots of other people to make the research happen. And I'm very proud that we do have grants that enable that to work really well. When I look across our grants, I'm really struck by the fact that actually the most impactful thing that a research funder can do is really to provide support for people to be left to get on with exciting research projects and exciting research questions. Now, That sounds simple to do in practice. You pick great people, you give them some funds for a few years and let them get on with it. And before you know it, you have some wonderful research outcomes. And we do have a number of grant schemes that look like that. But of course, there are other challenges to think about. You want to support people who've not had the same opportunities, for example, to get some time to do research. Universities are big and complicated places, and at the moment they're also in the UK suffering a financial crisis. And so lots of things are being squeezed, including scholarship and research. And so it's kind of an important question as to where we should be supporting people, where that support would be most useful in terms of the enablement that it gives people to go and do their research. The Leverhulme Trust does support people via its project grants, but obviously we also have a range of grants that are much more geared to either supporting people in a direct way, like our fellowships, or in the case of the Philip Leverhulme Prizes, really recognising truly brilliant researchers. And it's an interesting scheme, the Philip Leverhulme Prize, because it's a reward not just for excellence in the past, all of them are amazing in terms of their achievements, but also it includes a project which is about what they're going to do in the future. And the idea of the prize, of course, is to give that person some freedom, some intellectual freedom to be able to pursue some really interesting research ideas with a little bit of resource so that they can make their own way and make their own research agenda. The Leverhulme Trust funds into UK universities predominantly, and quite apart from our origins, there's a reason for that. The UK only has 1% of the world's population, but it can claim 12% of the top cited journal articles. And so clearly the UK is a world leader in research. But actually, when you get into it, research is quietly international. Almost all the major discoveries in the last 20, 30 years have been undertaken by research teams that span international borders. Research is an inherently international activity now, and researchers quietly get on with it, collaborate with people across a wide range of countries, and it is that international collaboration that's such a great strength. It's vital for the world that that ability to collaborate across borders continues. Yes, it's undoubtedly getting harder to make the case for globalization, but in the case of research, I think it's much easier to point to huge successes that have been built off the back of international collaboration. Now, don't get me wrong, there are areas where one has to be cautious about sharing research and perhaps not just in defence. So I'm not suggesting an entirely open model, but nonetheless, when you look at the success of research over the last couple of decades, you would conclude that international collaboration has been a major reason for why progress has been so rapid. When I joined the Leverhulme Trust, I went and had a look at what you might call the sort of big success stories of our funding. And graphene was clearly one of those success stories. We had funded a researcher very early in his career to work on graphene, and actually subsequently funded a number of people, both in his lab and elsewhere, to work on the applications of graphene. So you could point to this as an example of project-based funding in the sense of, this was developing a very interesting, innovative material and clearly down the line had huge real-world applications. But what's really interesting about the graphene story is, of course, we didn't fund graphene. We funded Konstantin at the beginning of his career. We gave him a grant, an early career fellowship, enthused by his talent, gave him 3 years to go and research whatever it was that he wanted to research. And it wasn't as though at the end of that grant he had all the answers, but it was the start of his career. He went on to get further grants, and then, the rest is history, as they say. He de facto invented graphene. And it's a nice story, I think, because it illustrates two aspects of our funding. One is, if you support the right people, great things happen at the end of it. And we didn't really need to know when we funded him originally that graphene might come out the other end. What we really needed to know was whether it was worth funding him as a person, and clearly it was. But the other aspect of it is also that one of the best bits about this job is when you go around academia, just how many people can point to a Leverhulme grant at some point in their career. It may not have been in the last few years, it might have been very early on, or perhaps a research fellowship when they got their first academic position to buy them out of their teaching so they could continue their research. Whatever it is, you get people coming up to you saying, you know, that was the grant that really made a difference because it enabled me to do this particular project or write this particular book. And of course, we're always tempted to point to, you know, the amazing people that we funded, but actually what we should be most proud of is funding an awful lot of doctoral students and early career researchers, many of whom go on to do wonderful things in research and indeed in commercial roles and other research roles beyond academia. So when I joined the Trust and started going round on visits to university, I was really struck by the fact that almost every academic who interacts with us is incredibly positive about our team that runs all the grants. Now, our team is wonderful, but the comments weren't just about their efficiency or how well they managed a grant. They were a lot more personal than that. And I think one of the secrets to our success is that we have a long-standing team that take responsibility for their grant schemes and they know them really well. And you can see this in the stories that people like, for example, Konstantin say, which is, you know, they helped me get my application in. They helped me overcome the fact that I was missing information and I couldn't get the letter in time, or they supported me by guiding me how I should complete a section of the form. And it's those sort of personal relationships between the team and the applicants that really make the difference. And more generally also, I think we're incredibly sensitive to the fact that academics have a lot of time constraints and increasing levels of reporting and other things to do. And so we've tried to keep our grant making really quite light touch. Obviously we have to ask some things, but what we're trying to do is you know, enable the researcher to basically get on and do the research with a minimum of bureaucracy at our end.